After decades of not doing its job, Congress is now trying to take back power from the executive branch through the court system. Blaze senior politics editor Chris Bedford wrote about this in his latest Beltway brief, and he joins us now. So, Chris, how are Democrats trying to use Congress now and the courts to go after Trump?
Well, it's been an interesting and ironic story to see Congress trying to suddenly curtail, the Democrats trying to suddenly curtail the power of the executive. This has not been something they've been interested in doing. Matt and I's mutual friend, the late, great Michael Uhlman, talked at length about this during his career, about the complete decline over the last 50 years of actual real oversight by Congress, the surrendering of their authority. I mean, the founders set up this system expecting people to be jealous of their power, but actually the Congress has been tempted more by television cameras and fundraising and hanging out with rich people and insider trading, and they're not that really jealous of the power of the executive. And you know what? We're just going to find out a little bit more of why. It's because the executive has been doing what Democrats want, regardless of who is in the White House, and it's been that way for decades. That's why you see Joe Biden trying to name people career civil servants as opposed to political nominees when he's on his way out the door. That's why you see Democrats flipping out about people losing their jobs. That's why where I live and the county next to me and the county next to that and the county next to that are all on the watch list for trans bathrooms and trans pornography in children's elementary schools. These are Democrat-run cities here in Washington, D.C., and it's all because the civil service is essentially on their side. Now, having surrendered their power to the executive, knowing that it's going to just continuously do what they want, Democrats are now really putting separation of powers in danger. You keep on hearing them scream, it's a constitutional crisis. What the actual crisis, if there is one, and it's not there yet, is that they're with Democrat backing, Democrat judges, and Democrat districts. District judges are now going there and saying the executive branch of the U.S. government is not allowed to run the executive branch. I mean, you've literally got a judge in Manhattan issuing an order that political appointees do not have access to information in their own department. Now, who does have access to that information, if not the people who run it? It's a complete rebellion against the power of the presidency. It's a complete overreach by judiciary. It's absolutely lawless, and it threatens the actual separation of powers were any of it to go through. You know, most of these cases are going to get knocked down. Once they get to Supreme Court, John Roberts, Chief Justice, for all of his flaws, does have a strong opinion of executive authority. He's going to err with the White House on a lot of these things. But here's one of the issues that the White House has. The Supreme Court is not going to make a ruling that judges can't make these as nationwide bans. They can't just control the executive with a written order from Hawaii unless the Trump administration loses one of its cases on the merits. So, for example, let's say Trump says dogs are now cats. Supreme Court says that's true, bounce it back to the lower courts, it's over. That's the only question that's considered. But if the Supreme Court says, actually, dogs are not cats, that's not true. But the Hawaiian judge that signed the order putting the ban on him, you're not allowed to do that for anyone except for the people represented specifically in your suits. Nationwide injunctions are not a real thing. They are invented, but for lawfare purposes, they're invented by the administrative state. And, you know, this is something the Democrats actually agree with, because when you saw a Texas judge rule against abortion pills and issue a nationwide injunction, they were like, ignore it. Completely ignore it. He has no power to do that. And you know what? He actually probably didn't. They had a legal case there. But that has been forgotten in the age of Trump. And that's what's setting us up for where we are right now.
Chris, so glad you mentioned the late, great Michael Uhlman, gentleman, scholar, PhD, lawyer, worked in the Reagan administration, was the first guy in the transition team to ask Clarence Thomas if he'd ever thought about being a Supreme Court justice. The man,
he's a legend.
Guys like that knew what they were talking about when they talked about separation of powers at an intellectual and a practical level. So let's drill into this a little bit. Let's nerd out a little bit here. I think if Jill will let me. Let me tell a story. From the before times when a young Matthew Peterson went to Congress before Trump, in the before times, before Trump appeared on the scene. And I went to this event with a bunch of people we both know, and it was a meeting of, congressional muckety-mucks, so a lot of key staffers from some of the more powerful people in Congress. And they were talking about what to do about healthcare at the time. Remember Obamacare? They're all Republicans, okay? And one of the guys there, who's from the Ullman, the Claremont, the Hillsdale sort of crowd, is looking at them as they're talking. And they're all talking. These are congressional, right, high-ranking staffers, powerful people in Congress. And they're all talking about how the courts will take care of the problem. Ultimately, Obamacare is unconstitutional, whatever, but, I'm hoping this will go through the courts this way, and then the courts will take care of the problem. In other words, this is a reverse image of exactly what you're talking about with the Democrats in Congress now going to the courts to solve the problem. And the Hillsdale Claremont guy, kind of stopped them all and looked at them like, isn't this the United States Congress? What if you use the power of Congress to pass a frickin' law? God forbid, right? And I wonder, in this case, they're doing the same thing. If we're Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. If they're in Congress, the first thing they think about a lot of times is not what they can do, right? Because they don't consider themselves passing laws. They don't consider themselves as having serious oversight power. But they look to the courts and say the courts should adjudicate this, or I should use the courts, rightly or wrongly, against my enemies. So do you think in this case, they're going to find out, I'm assuming, that the district court and these things mean nothing. Like you said, it's not a thing. They're probably not going to have an effect. But could we actually get to the point, if Trump keeps pushing, where Congress actually tries to use its power to legislate again?
Wouldn't that be interesting? They're afraid of even the process. They're afraid of having votes. They're afraid of talking about anything that's just not already been decided. They're afraid of hard questions, to your point. I guarantee you that if there was a time machine and Republicans thought that Roe v. Wade was ever actually going to get repealed, they would not have confirmed Brett Kavanaugh. They came out for him, claiming, they go to the marches, they say this, but even when they say they want to fight in the courts, the reality is they don't want to fight at all. Republicans generally treat their majority like a shiny trophy that they want to put on their mantle and protect at all costs. Don't let the kids touch it. Don't let the wife touch it. And Democrats usually use their majority and say, we're going to lose this, but we're going to change the country forever. And that's going to be our actual mark on history. They're willing to push through on that. But listen, if Democrats themselves use the power of the purse and are actually willing to do these sorts of things, and that might be a healthy thing for the Republic in general, at least as far as the civics course goes, and it could actually activate some kind of jealousy in Congress. But here's the issue, and Ullman talked about this a great deal, is they've forgotten how. I know it seems strange in the age of the internet. You look at these ancient civilizations and say, how could we forget knowledge? But we forget it every day, especially in Washington, D.C. Really, in the last couple of years of media, it seems like people forget things week to week, major events that seems to be important are completely put in the background. And a lot of Congress has forgotten how to legislate. Some of the things you would actually need to do to reassert Congress. And this is something that conservatives have stupidly been appalled at previously. Double its budget. Make it so congressmen actually have a decent salary. They have to maintain 2 different houses. They have to do all these things. And here's the thing that drives them crazy and makes them corrupt. They hang out with rich people all day, every day. They're the only people, them and reporters, who hang out with folks who are that far out of their class regularly. You don't see that anywhere else. And increase the staff budgets dramatically. Don't be sending money back to Treasury and issue a press release, look at how fiscally conservative I am. You need 40 and 50 and 60-year-old people in your office who are absolute experts in their field. You don't want them on K Street lobbying against the U.S. people. You don't want them making all the money that pays for all the mansions in McLean out there. So you need to pay them a decent wage, make it respectable, have them come in here and do battle with the administrative state. If you start to get a Congress that's serious like that and is willing to say, all right, I know you're yelling at the street Tea Party, but I need really talented people. I need to retain them. I need to fight the federal government. I need to relearn these skills. It is written down. It is in books. Some of the most effective staffers, some of whom we know, I go to their house and they're reading 100-year-old books on the operations of the U.S. Senate because these are actually tools that can be used. The groups over at Conservative Partnership Institute, Jim and Mintz Group, teach courses on how to use things that are completely forgotten by the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives, different parliamentary tools. That's one of the things that Mitch McConnell actually was a master at. Before him, Harry Reid was a master of this. Parliamentary procedure, how the histories of the Senate and how to twist things and get your way. And as you'll notice, Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell both got their way a great deal. So if you can get the Congress to begin to do that again, and there have been some positive signs, well, that'd be a great step.
Yeah, I love that. You're like everybody that's out there on Capitol Hill. They've forgotten all the things. But my favorite line that you're talking about was your unelected 23-year-old staffers that are running Capitol Hill that was there in today's Beltway brief. So if we're saving so much money in all these other places right now, I mean, maybe some of these staffers on the Hill can actually get a pay raise and we can get some more experience back in there. And then you have people that are ready to actually go up and battle the deep state, because that's what we need at this point in time, are people that aren't just, 23 years old, that are just fresh out of college, that are trying to come up here and figure out how to take down this giant behemoth.
Flashing their staff IDs at local bars like it's going to get them some kind of favor that they're somehow special. It's so cringeworthy. I used to bounce in Washington, D.C. down in Georgetown, and I saw some pretty wild stuff, the high up opinions these young staffers have of themselves. But yeah, you need that experience. Make congressional jobs respectable again, because the spending problem is not in those salaries. The spending problem is in the administrative state. The spending problem is in the deep state. That's where you need the experienced people who are willing to put their lives out there and go after it.
Yeah, before we let you go, Pete Hegseth was out there talking today, and he was just going out there and saying, there's still the Pentagon, there's still going to be the deep state. We're going to try and stop this war between Ukraine and Russia. But we know that money is still going to figure out some way to flow through, Bedford. We know it's going to happen, right?
And what's sick and what's been exposed more over the past couple of years is that the people who've been paying all this money, the people who claim we must fight for democracy, and anyone who questions it's a tool of Putin, they never thought that Ukraine was going to win this war. It was considered unwinnable by Boris Johnson, Lloyd Austin, Joe Biden. People didn't expect that. They looked at this, and you see this, Lindsey Graham's actually crazy enough to say it out loud. They looked at this as a way to beat up Russia, to bleed Russia. And they use other people's armies, little green men, other people's lives, other people's sons and daughters, wives, mothers, sisters, aunts and uncles to go out there into a meat grinder that America would pay for all this corruption that you see all throughout the Ukrainian government. And of course, Russia has a fair share of all those things as well. And they never even thought they were going to win. So when they start to roll their eyes and get mad at Pete Hegseth for saying, no, we're not doing NATO. And by the way, you could have actually negotiated a better truce with Russia originally when Ukraine was negotiating before it was torpedoed by Boris Johnson, that villain. Then you realize that they're full of it, that they're not actually serious, that they never actually want a peace. This is just a proxy war using Europeans to fight other Europeans. And hopefully Hegseth can really do something about that with Donald Trump's negotiations.
Well, I hope that the snow in D.C. doesn't affect your interview. I know you're going to have Congressman Brandon Gill on this show for later in the week. He's one of our favorite congressmen because he came on the show and he was like, I'm going to count my success based on the number of illegals that get deported in my first 2 years. And I'm like, you know what? If you're going out there and saying that before you've even gone in and taken the oath, we can get along with you.
He's wonderful. I was in his office earlier this week setting up an interview. The snow has screwed up his schedule, so I'm working to get that right now. But we may have a very special guest on in his stead.
All right. I'll let that go because I think I know. And I think that the people at home will be very excited for that as well.